Hello Year 9, hope you're all doing well. It's Mr. Lakins here. Today's lesson we're going to be talking through the poems London and Living Space, doing a bit of a recap. I know some of you recently covered these poems, some of you may not have done. Either way it's fine. The purpose of today's lesson is to go through the main points of the poems, the main quotations, the key quotations, and make sure that your notes are up to date. So as we're going through, just pause as and when you need to catch up and make sure you're getting this stuff noted down. Okay, to start off then, we're going to do a quick quiz. This is a recap of the poetry we have covered so far. We've done As Imperceptibly as Grief, To Autumn, The Prelude and Death of a Naturalist. So what I'm going to do is put quotes up on the screen and I want you to decide whether they are poem A, B, C or D. There are 8 quotes. Make sure you're not looking up the answers. Just do it from memory or have a guess if you're not sure. There are 8 quotes. So perhaps on a piece of paper now you just want to write 1 to 8. I'm going to run through them quite quickly. I'm just going to flash the quote up on the screen and as quick as you can just think, right, I think this is in poem B. So To Autumn. Okay. First one. The orange sky of evening died away. So just A, B, C or D. Which poem does that come from? Okay, your next quotation. Our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Okay, number 3. Poised like mud grenades. Number 4. The summer lapsed away. Number 5. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. Number 6. I sickened, turned and ran. Number 7, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. And finally, number 8, the cottage windows through the twilight blazed. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers now, see how you did. You should have C, A, D, A, B, D, B, C. So just check your answers there, give them a tick if you got them right. Okay, so a short question for you to have a think about now, and that's how do you feel when you pass a homeless person on the street? There's no right or wrong answer here, it's just something I want you to have a think about. How does that make you feel? Now, I'd expect a range of responses to this question, ranging from you feel sympathy, you feel afraid for that person who's living on the street, to maybe you want to sort of turn a blind eye to it. You've got your own problems. You sort of pretend it's not there. All different responses that we might have to seeing something like this. Now, the reason it's relevant to the poem that we're about to talk about, London, is because we'll just talk through this context now. William Blake was an English poet. Much of his poetry was influenced by his views on social and racial equality. And the poem was published in 1794, and this was a time of great poverty in many parts of London. So the poverty in London really inspired this poem, London. And as we read the poem, you'll see how angry Blake seems to be at how London has failed these people who are living in poverty, these people who are very poor. So, much like nowadays we might walk through our town or walk through a city and see people living on the street, Blake saw sights like that in 1794 and was very angry about the fact that this was going on. Now, before we move into the poem, just something else I want to point out quickly. Blake was a romantic poet, so like Keats and Wordsworth, remember the Romantic movement, he was writing in that late 18th century, and whilst he's not writing about nature in this poem, like the other romantic poets seem to do, he does talk about social reform, the lack of nature in London, and he's angry at the powers that be, which is another trait of romantic poetry. So before we go through and analyse the poem, I think it would be definitely worth just listening through a reading of the poem. I won't read through it because you're going to hear me talking a lot, so just to give you a bit of a break, perhaps if you follow this link, you can listen to a reading by Idris Elba. The link will be in the description. So just follow that link, have a listen through the poem, pause this video, and then when you're ready to, just continue. Okay, so you should now have, if you've read through the poem yourself, if you've listened to Idris Elba reading it, you've now had a read through the poem, and I'm just going to summarise for you the main ideas that the poet, Blake, is trying to get across. It might be worth jotting some of these down, particularly if you don't feel very clear about what the poem is about. It might be just worth either on your poem or on a separate sheet of paper, jotting these down. We are going to annotate the poem a bit, so make sure you've got room. So the narrator is describing a walk around London and how he is saddened by the sights and sounds of poverty. So it's very simple in terms of what happens in the poem. He is walking down the chartered streets and he's seeing and hearing the sounds of sights of poverty, and he's really saddened and becomes very angry about what he can see and hear. The poem focuses on how innocence is lost, society is corrupt. The poem uses rhetoric, so persuasive techniques, to convince the reader that those in power are to blame for inequality within society. So it's a very angry poem. It's also sort of a persuasive poem. He's trying to persuade us to feel the same way. He's trying to persuade the reader to say, yes, church and government are to blame for the situation that these people are in. So it's certainly a persuasive poem. It's written in the first person. He is speaking passionately about what he sees. It's a dramatic monologue. So again, a monologue, remember, when one person is the sole voice. And it has a simple A-B rhyme scheme reflecting the unrelenting misery of the city. It's very... William Blake was someone who, as a poet, experimented a lot with poetic form. When you look at this poem on the page, it's very straightforward. The rhyme scheme is very mundane almost. Mundane's not fair because there are some great poems written with A-B rhyme scheme. But for him, it's very simple. And I think perhaps he's trying to reflect the mundane nature of, it's the same day after day. This is the way it is. Perhaps. Okay, so pause the video here if you want to stop and make some more notes on these, but I'm now going to take you through sort of 5 key annotations on the poem as well, which I would like you to note down. So here we've got the poem in front of us. So one thing that's very clear, there's sensory imagery throughout this poem, making it really immersive, so we get a lot of sight and sound. So for example, as he's wandering through these streets, he marks in every face marks of weakness and woe. So he sees in every face weakness and woe. But then the next stanza, stanza 2, he says, in every cry of every man, every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, all these sounds that he can hear. So he can not only see the poverty, but he can hear poverty all around him as well. Manacles. My favourite quote from the poem, the mind-forged manacles I hear. So again, manacles are, like chains are what you put a prisoner into. So the idea that they're mind-forged manacles suggests these people are trapped in this situation, in poverty. And this metaphor also suggests they're not just physically trapped, but they're mentally constrained as well. They're mind-forged. So it's almost like their belief systems are trapping them. They don't have to be in this situation maybe, but they've been told they have to be. Perhaps. Rhetorical language is used to persuade the reader. So again, in this second stanza, in every cry, in every infant's cry, in every voice. So that repetition, again, it's almost like a speech. When you read speeches, you see that type of rhetoric used, that repetition, to make it really convincing and to get the reader on board. We've got this quote here, and the arrow's a bit low there. It should be at the third stanza, and the hapless soldier's sigh should be up here. And the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. So the soldiers are suffering and dying because of those in power who remain safe behind their palace walls. So it's showing, he's angry at those people who are quite rich. They're in palaces, nice and safe and cosy, while a hapless soldier is sighing and his blood is running down the palace walls. It's not literally running down the palace walls, but it's almost like the blood is on their hands. It's that kind of imagery. And also he accuses the church of being corrupt. Again, this arrow is a bit low. I don't know why that's happened. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls. So he's talking about the church there, which is seen as holy and pure, and he's saying it's blackening. It's darkening because it's corrupt, and he's blaming the chimney sweepers' cry on the church. He's saying that the church has turned their back on these poor children who have to go and sweep chimneys, which is dangerous and very unhealthy work. And he's angry about that. He's calling the church out directly, which was a very rebellious thing to do at the time, because the church and the government were very much in power. They said how things were, and Blake was not happy with the way they were doing things. So if you pause here, take as long as you need to make those notes down. That is all the work we're going to do on London, and we're now going to have a look at living space. Okay, so moving on to living space. If you have a look at the images on the screen now in front of you, if you remember a little about the context of living space, you'll recognise these images of Mumbai, which is a city in India. Now, what you can see in most of these images are these structures that are made of scrap, all different shapes and sizes, and they look a little like they might fall over if there was a strong wind or a storm. Now, these are the shanty towns in Mumbai. This is the poverty that is rife in Mumbai, which is out of the city and all in these towns. So there are a couple of images I've included of Mumbai. So up here in the top right, this is from a tourism website, and you can see Mumbai actually, very modern city, a lot of wealth and a lot of money there. And in the image below, you can see this direct line, this almost like a completely straight line where the wealthy side of town ends and the shanty towns begin. So, like London, this is a poem that's about poverty. But this poem is more positive, I think, than London. It focuses on the miracle that people manage to live and survive in these conditions. So, a little context. Dharka, Imtiaz Dharka, the poet, was born in Pakistan. She grew up in Scotland. Her poetry often deals with the subject of identity, which is obviously close to her heart because she moved countries. She's been around lots of different cultures, and so the idea of finding a sense of belonging, finding your identity, is important to her. She's a contemporary poet, which means that she is alive now and she's writing poetry now. She's also a film director, has scripted a number of documentaries in India supporting work with women and children. Make sure you've got some notes on the context, and then when you're ready, we will quickly read the poem together. Okay, so let's have a quick read of the poem to familiarise ourselves with it. Living space. There are just not enough straight lines. That is the problem. Nothing is flat or parallel. Beams balance crookedly on supports, thrust off the vertical. Nails clutch at open seams. The whole structure leans dangerously towards the miraculous. Into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space, and even dared to place these eggs in a wire basket, fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe, gathering the light into themselves, as if they were the bright, thin walls of faith. Okay, so let's summarise the poem now. So I'm going to put some, again, main points of the poem, just what it's about. If you could jot these down somewhere, make sure you've written them down. We will be annotating parts of the poem as well, so give yourself some room to do so. So this poem describes a ramshackle, cramped living space in Mumbai, India. The lines of the buildings are slanted and unstable, reflecting the lives of the people that live in these shanty towns. The poet seems to admire the people who make such a daring attempt to live in these places. And the poem is split into two parts. The first stanza explores the danger of the place itself, whereas the second and the third stanzas start to deal with the optimism and the hope of the people that live there, their faith. So please make sure you've jotted those down, and when you're ready, move on to doing some annotating. Okay, so one thing I really like about this poem, Living Space, is the form of the poem. The structure of it on the page very clearly reflects the subject of the poem. So let's talk about that a little bit. The enjambment and short lines reflect the unstable housing structures. So you can see all through this first stanza, and the whole poem really, the enjambment means that the lack of punctuation at the end of a line. So we don't have many full stops at the end of lines. A lot of them sort of run on to the next line. And the short lines, well, the lines are all different lengths. There are some longer, some shorter. And that very quickly and clearly reflects the way the buildings are all different shapes and sizes, and nothing is parallel. So, yeah, really nice and clear. Also, that short stanza in the middle, into this rough frame, someone has squeezed a living space. Literally, that stanza is squeezed into the poem. So again, just very clear, nice use of structure it's like Doug is just playing around a little bit with the structure to get at what she's talking about. So really, really nice. Now, two more annotations here. If we look at that the third stanza, we've got that light and dark imagery that comes through. So about the eggs, which are these fragile curves of white hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe. So this is showing the dangerous nature of the living conditions, and these eggs, which are clean and white, they represent the hope and the faith of those living in the slums. But then that whole idea of a slanted universe, that word slanted is interesting because it could refer to the fact that everything is sort of leaning and ready to fall over. But I've read some analysis where it's thought that perhaps it's referring to the universe being corrupt. It's slanted. It's not the way it should be, because right next to these slums you've got all these wealthy people, all of these big houses. It's just potentially one reading that you could make. So the third stanza is where the poem becomes a little bit more metaphorical. That first stanza is very clear. This is what the houses look like. This is how the structures are built. One thing you could talk about in that first stanza, though, is that semantic field of danger. So remember, a semantic field is a group of words belonging to one particular subject. So here you've got words like crookedly, balanced, lean, slanted. They all emphasise the instability of the living space, the fact that it could fall apart at any moment. Okay, and those are our annotations on living space. The key facts now, so if you want to pause to make sure you've got those down, add them if you don't already have those notes. And then the key facts, I'll let you read through these yourself because this video is, I know, getting a little bit long now. So these are the key facts for London. And these are your key facts for living space that are in your fact book that you should now be fairly confident with. Again, I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but you've not had to do many tasks. It's been more sort of listening to me ramble on. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's made those poems nice and clear for you. Make sure you know the key facts, and thank you very much.